Hello! Today we're going to be talking about winning the war, what it was like on the battlefield, how the U.S. was able to fight a war on two fronts. One side, the European theater, the other side, the Pacific theater. So let's get started. So let's take a look at the American soldier during World War II. They were referred to as GIs. Remember, they were referred to as doughboys during World War I, but in World War II they will be called GIs, or government issued. 16 million Americans served in the military during World War II. Over 400,000 young men lost their lives. And they fought a war on multiple fronts, one side in Europe and the other in the Pacific. It wasn't just white Americans contributing to the war effort. Many minorities were able to achieve many great things during the war, such as the Tuskegee Airmen. This was the first African-American fighter pilot unit. They downed over 400 enemy planes despite obvious racism in the military and at home. Remember last time we talked about the double V, the victory at home and abroad. And then the Navajo Code Talkers. These Native American soldiers sent messages to U.S. soldiers in Japan. The Japanese were unable to translate these messages since they were in Native American dialects. And then the 442nd Nisei Unit. This was a regiment of Japanese American soldiers. Despite their race, they became the highest decorated unit in World War II. As a strategy, the Allies agreed to concentrate on Europe first and to go after Germany to defeat them. The goal was to push Germany back to Berlin. A plan was created called Operation Overlord. This was planned by General Dwight Eisenhower, and it involved an invasion of France. Remember, France had been taken over by Germany. Operation Overlord would finally take effect on June 6, 1944, a day that we now refer to as D-Day. And at his disposal, General Eisenhower had 1,200 warships, 800 transport ships, 4,000 landing craft, 10,000 airplanes, and hundreds of tanks. The idea was troops would cross the English Channel by ship and land on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. This involved the United States, Canada, and Britain. They would land on a series of 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. So they did so, and Eisenhower gave a message to the troops. In that message he said that morning, "You will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world." He knew that many of these men would not return. The landing craft unloaded Allied troops on Normandy's 5 beaches, while warships provided covering gunfire from offshore. German gun batteries took aim at the mass of invading soldiers, who by now were wading ashore, crawling along the sand, and climbing the dunes and cliffs. One soldier later described his arrival at Omaha Beach, scene of the bloodiest fighting. "It seemed like the whole world exploded. There was a gunfire from battleships, destroyers, and cruisers. The bombers were still hitting the beaches. As we went in, we could see small craft from the 116th Infantry that had gone in ahead, sunk. There were bodies bobbing in the water, even out 3 or 4 miles. And that comes from Lieutenant Robert Eldlin from Gerald Astor, June 6, 1944, The Voices of D-Day. But after the chaos of landing, the soldiers regrouped. By the end of the first day, the Allies had the entire 59-mile section of the Normandy coast. In July, the American Army under General Bradley and the British Army under General Bernard Montgomery began a rapid sweep across France. In August, the Allies liberated Paris. And in September, the first American GIs crossed the German border. By May 8th of 1945, Germany would surrender. Days earlier, Adolf Hitler had committed suicide. So with D-Day providing the turning point and ultimately leading to the end of the war in Europe, the United States and her allies were able to focus on the war in the Pacific. The Japanese had been able to advance in the Pacific after Pearl Harbor. They took control of many American territories, including the Philippine Islands. And the U.S. took on a policy of island hopping. It was their counteroffensive to take back these islands from Japan, including the Philippines, until they were able to reach mainland Japan. Remember, the culture in Japan is completely centered around serving the military. That's why you see the use of kamikazes during the Second World War. Japanese planes would crash into Allied ships, the pilots knowing they would die, but it was all for the cause. Japan was backed up by the Allies, but they refused to surrender. This tactic was used in the battles of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. Before victory in Europe was secured, FDR passed away in April of 1945. His vice president, Harry Truman, will assume the role of the presidency. Japan continues the fight while Truman hopes for a quick end to World War II. But in July of 1945, Truman is given the news that U.S. scientists have developed and successfully tested an atomic bomb. This project or program was codenamed the Manhattan Project. Upon reaching Japan, the Allies feared invading would result in massive casualties. Some estimates said that a land invasion of Japan would cost up to 1 million lives. The Manhattan Project was a top-secret project to create the atomic bomb. It was tested in New Mexico, and it turned sand into glass. While at the conference in Potsdam, the Potsdam Declaration was issued by the Allies warning the Japanese to surrender, but they did not. Truman then ordered the dropping of the first atomic bomb, and then a second, these occurring at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japanese, after experiencing the devastation of both of these bombs, surrendered in August 14th of 1945, and the war was officially over. We'll spend quite a bit of time looking at the reasons for using the bomb and the effect of the bomb in class, but just to give you an idea right here, within seconds of the explosion, up to 80,000 people died when that first bomb was dropped by the Enola Gay on Hiroshima. The blast shock was toppled nearly 60,000 structures, and hundreds of fires consumed the rest of the city. 3 days later, the U.S. dropped a second atomic bomb. This one obliterated the city of Nagasaki, killing some 40,000 people instantly. As many as 250,000 Japanese may have died from the two atomic bombs, either directly or as a result of the burns, radiation poisoning, or cancer. But Truman had no regrets. "Let there be no mistake about it," he said later. I regarded the bomb as a military weapon and never had any doubt that it should be used. The destruction of Nagasaki brought a Japanese surrender. Truman received this informal surrender on August 14th, Victory over Japan Day, or VJ Day. The terms of the surrender allowed the emperor to keep his office, but only in ceremonial role. The Allies officially accepted the surrender aboard the American battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. We'll be talking quite a bit about the results of World War II as we enter the Cold War after April break, but some things that happened right after the war include the Nuremberg trials. This is where dozens of Nazi leaders were placed on trial for their actions during the Holocaust. 24 of them are found guilty. The punishments range from jail sentences to death by hanging. This proved that even when you're just following orders, you could be held accountable for your actions. Another outcome will be the replacement of the League of Nations with the United Nations. In 1944, delegates from 39 countries met in Washington, D.C. to discuss this new entity. The creation of the General Assembly and Security Council also took place. On April 25th, representatives from 50 countries came to San Francisco to organize the UN and set up its charter. The UN meets in New York City in the United States. That's right, this time the U.S. will be a part of this peacekeeping organization. All right, that concludes World War II. after break, we'll get into the Cold War. We'll see a lot of the impact that World War II had on America for decades to follow. And not just America, but for the rest of the world for decades to follow.